I was standing on the factory floor when my phone buzzed with an urgent bank alert. I looked at the screen and my heart nearly stopped. My own son had secretly sold my company to pay for his $300,000 wedding. He thought I was too old to stop him. He believed he had already won, but he had no idea that one thing I had protected for 40 years was about to turn his dream wedding into the worst day of his life. My name is Ethan. For 40 long, exhausting, and grueling years, I was the very first person to pull into the parking lot at Hale Manufacturing, and I was always the last one to turn off the lights. If you walk onto that factory floor today, you will smell the sharp, metallic tang of cutting fluids, hear the rhythmic, thunderous stamp of the heavy hydraulic presses, and see the sparks flying from the automated welding cells. To an outsider, it's just a massive, cold concrete facility nested in the industrial heart of Chicago. But to me, that building holds my sweat, my blood, my youth, and every single dream I ever dared to have. I didn't inherit a single dime of this empire. I built it from absolute scratch through sheer, unyielding grit. When I was starting out in my 20s, there were weeks where I survived on nothing but cheap black coffee and 4 hours of sleep on a grease-stained cot inside a tiny, unheated office. I skipped family vacations, I worked through holidays, and I pushed my body to its absolute physical limits to ensure that my family would never, ever know the crushing weight of poverty that I grew up with. I did it all for them. I believed with everything inside me that blood was the ultimate bond. I thought that by shielding my only son, Julian, from the brutal hardships of life, I was giving him a gift. When the time finally came for me to take a step back from the grueling daily operations, I felt a profound sense of pride. My hair had turned gray, my joints ached from decades of standing on hard factory floors, and my doctor told me my heart couldn't take the 80-hour workweeks anymore. So I did what any loving father would do. I called a company-wide meeting, stood up in front of hundreds of loyal employees, and proudly handed the master keys of the executive suite to Julian. I looked into his eyes and truly believed that the core values of integrity, humility, and fierce loyalty had been passed down to him. I thought he would guard our family legacy with his life. I was blind. I didn't realize that by handing him those keys, I wasn't empowering a successor. I was opening the door to a wolf in a designer suit. A wolf who looked at my 40 years of sacrifice not as a legacy to protect, but as an easy paycheck to spend. I retired to a quiet, peaceful life, thinking my legacy was secure. I had no idea that behind my back, my own son was already calculating exactly how much he could get for selling my entire life's work down the river. When Julian graduated from college, I didn't just hand him a job at Hale Manufacturing, I handed him a kingdom on a silver platter. I wanted him to understand the business, but more than that, I wanted him to feel respected. I immediately appointed him CEO, stepped down into a quiet advisory retirement role, and set his starting salary at a staggering 6 figures. I made sure he had a beautiful corner office overlooking the city, a corporate expense account, and the kind of financial security most people his age couldn't even dream of. I thought that by giving him everything I never had, I was setting him up for success. I wanted him to lead with confidence. But over the last 2 years, I watched a toxic, terrifying shift take place in my son. It started small. He stopped walking the factory floor to shake hands with the machinists and assembly line workers, the very people who kept our lights on. He started showing up late, spending hours at expensive 3-course business lunches, and filling his social media with pictures of designer watches and upscale clubs. The real catalyst for this transformation, however, was his fiancée, Scarlett. The moment Scarlett entered his life, Julian's vanity exploded. Scarlett was a woman deeply obsessed with high society, flash, and superficial status. To her, Hale Manufacturing wasn't a proud family legacy built on honest labor. It was just a giant checkbook meant to fund her elite lifestyle. She looked down on our roots, and under her influence, Julian became unrecognizable. He traded his humility for arrogance, treating our longtime staff like servants and viewing our family business as an old-fashioned relic that existed solely to finance his lifestyle. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, just a month before their scheduled wedding. Julian walked into my quiet home office without knocking, tossed thick, glossy binder onto my desk, and demanded a staggering $300,000.
I opened the binder and stared in absolute disbelief at the itemized expenses. They had booked one of the most exclusive, historic luxury wedding venues in downtown Chicago. They had rented a fleet of exotic sports cars for the wedding party. Scarlett had imported her dress from a boutique in Paris, and they were planning a month-long ultra-luxury honeymoon across the French Riviera. It wasn't a wedding. It was a circus of pure, unadulterated vanity. "I need you to liquidate some corporate reserves and wire this to the venue coordinator by Friday, Dad," Julian said, checking his gold watch as if he were ordering a coffee. I closed the binder slowly, looking up at my son. "Julian, $300,000 for a single night? That is more than some of our machinists earn in 5 years. Hale Manufacturing was built on the values of humility, hard work, and respecting the value of a dollar. We do not drain our corporate reserves to put on a show for people we don't even like. I'm not signing off on this." Julian's face darkened instantly. The mask of the polite, grateful son slipped, revealing an ugly, entitled stranger. "It's about status, Dad. Scarlett's family belongs to the country club. I'm the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, and I'm not going to look cheap in front of high society just because you still have the mindset of a broke factory worker." The insult stung, but I kept my composure. I leaned back in my chair and looked him dead in the eye. "My answer is no, Julian. If you want a $300,000 circus, you pay for it out of your own salary. I will not compromise the financial stability of our company or our workers for your ego."
He slammed his hand on my desk, glared at me for a long, silent moment, and then stormed out of the house, cursing under his breath. I sat in the silence of my office, a heavy ache in my chest, but I genuinely believed I had done the right thing. I was naive enough to think that setting a firm boundary would finally force him to grow up, take responsibility, and learn the value of the legacy he had been given. I had no idea that my refusal had just set a clock in motion, and that my son's greed was about to drive him to commit the ultimate betrayal. The blow that shattered my world arrived precisely at 9:15 a.m. on a Thursday morning, just 2 days before the wedding. I was sitting at my kitchen counter, enjoying a rare, quiet moment with a mug of black coffee, when my phone began to vibrate violently against the granite. The caller ID showed the name of Marcus, the senior commercial bank manager who had handled Hale Manufacturing's corporate accounts for nearly 30 years. Marcus wasn't a man who called just to chat. "Ethan," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a tense, hurried whisper the second I answered. "I'm calling you from my personal cell because something incredibly irregular is happening right now, and I need to know if you authorized it. Julian is in our main downtown branch right now with a team of lawyers. He is executing a massive, high-speed corporate wire transfer and attempting to sign over control of the primary operational accounts." My heart stopped. The coffee in my mug suddenly felt heavy, and a cold sweat broke across the back of my neck. "What do you mean, sign over control, Marcus? To whom?" "To Vance," Marcus replied, the gravity in his voice making my blood turn to ice. "The venture capitalist. Julian signed an emergency rushed acquisition contract late last night. He sold the entire operational structure of Hale Manufacturing to Vance's firm. Vance has already cleared a fast-tracked wire of $300,000 directly into Julian's personal account to cover his immediate wedding expenses, and the remaining multi-million-dollar buyout is scheduled to process the morning after the wedding. Ethan, did you authorize this?" "No," I whispered, my voice sounding hollow like it belonged to a dead man. I hung up the phone, grabbed my jacket, and drove to the office in a state of blind, suffocating shock. The drive into downtown Chicago felt like a blur. My mind was spinning, replaying 40 years of late nights, missed milestones, and grueling sacrifices. I had done it all so my son would have a legacy, and he was selling it like a piece of cheap scrap metal just to fund a single night of absolute vanity for a woman who didn't even know the name of a single worker on our assembly lines. When I stormed into the executive suite, I didn't even bother knocking. I slammed the heavy oak door open. Julian was sitting behind the massive mahogany desk that used to be mine, his feet propped on the polished wood, casually blowing a thick cloud of cigar smoke toward the ceiling. He didn't even look startled. He just smirked, lowering his feet slowly as I marched up to the desk and threw the printout of the bank alert directly onto his lap.
"What the hell is this, Julian?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and profound heartbreak. "You sold the company behind my back to a vulture capitalist like Vance?" Julian didn't flinch. He leaned back in his leather chair, took another slow puff of his cigar, and blew the smoke directly into my face. The sheer, disrespectful arrogance of the gesture made me want to tear the desk apart. "Calm down, Dad," Julian said, his tone dripping with a condescending smugness that cut deeper than any blade. "It's called business. You refused to fund my wedding, remember? You wanted to lecture me on humility. Well, Scarlett and I have a certain standard to maintain, and I found a way to secure the cash instantly. Vance's money already cleared. The venue is paid for, the sports cars are delivered, and Scarlett got her dream wedding." "You sold the livelihoods of 300 people for a wedding venue?" I roared, slamming my fists onto the desk. "This company is my life's work. You had no right." Julian's smirk instantly vanished, replaced by an ugly, cold sneer. He stood up, leaning across the desk until he was inches from my face. "I am the CEO, old man. The board answers to me now, and the daily operations are under my signature. You're 62 years old, washed up, and living in the past. This company belongs to the future, and the future is mine. So do yourself a favor. Take your old school pride, walk out of here, and go enjoy your forced retirement quietly. Don't ruin my big day." I stared at my son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, the boy I had shielded from every harsh reality of the world, and I realized he felt absolutely no remorse. He looked at me and saw nothing but an old, weak obstacle in his path to high society. He truly believed he had completely outsmarted me because he held the title of CEO. But as I looked into his arrogant, mocking eyes, a sudden piercing clarity washed over the anger. Julian was so blinded by his own greed and so consumed by Scarlett's shallow world of flash and status that he had overlooked the most critical detail of the entire corporate structure. He completely forgot that while I handed him the keys to the daily operations, I had never, not once, transferred the core legal ownership. I didn't say another word. I didn't scream, I didn't threaten him, and I didn't let him see the pain in my eyes. I simply gave him a slow, calm nod, turned on my heel, and walked out of the executive suite, leaving him alone with his cigar smoke. The heartbroken father inside me died on that floor, and the sharp, calculating businessman who built an empire from nothing completely woke up. The ride down the executive elevator was the quietest 60 seconds of my life. I stood staring at my reflection in the polished steel doors. My face looked older, the lines around my eyes deeper, but the frantic panic that had gripped my chest in the kitchen was entirely gone. It had been replaced by a cold, heavy, and absolute stillness. I stepped out into the humid Chicago air, pulled my jacket tight around my shoulders, and walked towards my car. Julian thought he had backed me into a corner. He thought my age made me weak, disposable, and easily pushed aside into a quiet retirement. He truly believed he had completely outsmarted me because he held the title of CEO.
But Julian had made a fatal corporate mistake. In his frantic, desperate rush to secure Vance's $300,000 wire transfer before the wedding weekend, he hadn't bothered to read the fine print of our corporate bylaws. He was so blinded by the flash of luxury sports cars and the approval of high society country clubs that he forgot how an empire is actually anchored. When I first stepped back from Hale Manufacturing, my attorney had warned me about the volatility of young blood. So we had built a legal fortress. While Julian had the authority to manage daily operations, sign payroll, and oversee manufacturing schedules as CEO, he held absolutely no ownership over the intellectual property. Every single core patent that kept our machinery running, every trademark, every proprietary software license that drove our automated assembly lines, and the overwhelming majority of the original voting shares were legally, unchangeably registered to one person, me. Without my explicit, notarized signature, any contract attempting to sell, merge, or liquidate the company wasn't just void, it was a federal crime.
I got into my car, reached into the glove box, and pulled out an encrypted USB drive that contained the digital backups of our master deeds and patent registrations. I wiped away the very last tear of betrayal that would ever fall from my eyes for my son. The heartbroken father was officially buried. I was the man who had fought tooth and nail through economic recessions, supply chain crises, and ruthless corporate raiders to keep Hale Manufacturing alive. Julian wanted to play a high-stakes corporate game, but he didn't even know the rules. I dialed the office of Caleb, my plant manager, and a friend who had stood by my side on the factory floor for over 20 years. Caleb was a man of absolute integrity, someone who knew the name of every worker's child and had skipped his own bonuses in the early days just to ensure our machinists got paid. "Caleb," I said, my voice cutting through the speakerphone with a sharp, commanding clarity he hadn't heard from me in years. "I need you to quietly pull the access logs for the main server room from last night. Don't say a word to Julian or his assistants. Meet me at my house in 1 hour and bring our chief legal counsel. It's time to protect our house." Caleb replied, not asking a single question. He recognized the tone. He knew the founder was back. For the next 60 minutes, I sat at my dining room table, spreading out the original paper deeds, the patent certificates with their raised gold seals, and the corporate charter documents. When Caleb and my attorney arrived, the look of grim determination on my face told them everything they needed to know. Julian had drawn first blood, but he had left himself completely exposed. I looked at the legal team and felt a ruthless, calculated calm wash over me. Being a kind, forgiving parent was over. It was time to show my son exactly how I earned my reputation in the business world. The clock on my dashboard read 11:45 p.m. when I pulled up to the curb outside the Blackstone Club, an exclusive members-only establishment in downtown Chicago where the city's elite went to hide behind heavy velvet curtains and thick cigar smoke. I knew Vance would be there. He was a creature of habit, a billionaire venture capitalist who treated corporate acquisitions like a sport. He thought he had just bought Hale Manufacturing for a fraction of its actual worth from an eager, desperate kid. He had no idea that the real owner of the empire was waiting for him in the shadows. My attorney and I were escorted into a private dining room at the back of the club. Vance was sitting alone at a long mahogany table, swirling a glass of expensive scotch, looking incredibly pleased with himself. When he looked up and saw me instead of Julian, his eyes narrowed slightly, the smug smile fading from his face. "Ethan," Vance said, leaning back in his leather chair and gesturing toward an empty seat, "I didn't expect to see you here tonight. If you're here to negotiate a consulting fee for your retirement, I'm afraid you're a bit late. Your son and I finalized the acquisition paperwork last night. The initial $300,000 wire has already been processed to his account." I didn't take the seat. I walked up to the table, opened my leather briefcase, and quietly laid down a thick stack of documents directly over his expensive scotch glass. At the very top of the pile were the original certified patent registrations with the federal gold seals, followed by the corporate charter and the explicit ownership clauses. "I'm not here to negotiate a retirement fee, Vance," I said, my voice dropping to a low, razor-sharp calm that made the billionaire sit up straight. "I'm here to show you exactly what you actually bought last night. Take a look at page 14. Vance frowned, picking up the documents with a look of mild amusement that quickly dissolved into absolute horror as his eyes scanned the legal text. I watched the color drain from his face, turning his expensive tan into a sickly pale white. "Julian signed over the operational infrastructure," Vance muttered, his hands beginning to shake slightly as he flipped through the pages. "Julian signed a worthless piece of paper," my attorney stepped forward, his voice cutting through the quiet room like a gavel. "As the CEO, Julian has the authority to manage daily operations, but according to the strict bylaws of Hale Manufacturing, he holds exactly 0% of the proprietary technology. Every single core patent that kept our machinery running, every trademark, every proprietary software license that drove our automated assembly lines, and the overwhelming majority of the original voting shares were legally, unchangeably registered to one person, me. Without my explicit, notarized signature, any contract attempting to sell, merge, or liquidate the company wasn't just void, it was a federal crime. Vance slammed the documents on the table, his eyes blazing with a mixture of intense rage and profound embarrassment. "That little punk lied to me. He swore the board had ratified the transfer. My firm just wired $300,000 of unbacked capital directly into his personal account." "I know," I said, leaning over the table until I was looking directly into his eyes. "He used your money to pay for his luxury wedding venue, his sports cars, and his French Riviera honeymoon. He stole from you, Vance, and the moment his scheduled multi-million-dollar buyout processes on Monday morning, he will have committed a federal wire fraud offense that will put him away for 20 years.
Vance reached for his phone, his face twisted in fury. "I'm calling the police right now. I'll have the FBI raid his apartment before sunrise. I will destroy him." "No," I said, reaching out and gently placing my hand over his phone, stopping him. "If you arrest him now, his high society lawyers will find a loophole, file for a delayed hearing, and drag this out in private court for years. He will play the victim. But if you wait until Saturday, if you wait until the wedding day, we can catch him in a trap he can never escape from. We can do this in front of everyone he wanted to impress." Vance stared at me for a long, heavy moment. A slow, ruthless understanding began to form in his eyes, replacing his rage with the calculated coldness of a fellow predator. He slowly lowered his phone and leaned back in his chair. "What exactly do you have in mind, Ethan?" For the next 2 hours, under the dim lights of the private club, the billionaire investor, my attorney, and I meticulously coordinated every single moving piece of our trap. We contacted the fraud division of our primary commercial bank, briefed the board of directors, and secured the full cooperation of local law enforcement. Julian thought he was walking down the aisle to claim his crown as a high society king. He had absolutely no idea that Vance and I had just turned his multi-million-dollar dream wedding into a beautifully orchestrated, inescapable legal execution. The grand ballroom of the historic Chicago luxury resort was a masterpiece of pure, unadulterated vanity. Crystal chandeliers hung from 30-foot ceilings, casting a blinding glow over 500 high-profile guests, elite business leaders, and local socialites. The scent of thousands of imported white roses filled the air, and a classical string quartet played softly in the background. At the front of the room, standing proudly at the altar, was my son, Julian. He looked radiant in his custom-tailored designer tuxedo, smiling like a king who had finally conquered the world. Beside him stood Scarlett, draped in French silk gown that cost more than a factory worker's annual salary. She held his hand with a possessive, triumphant grip, basking in the envy of everyone in the room. I sat quietly in the very back row, entirely unnoticed, dressed in the same simple dark suit I wore to board meetings. I watched as the priest stepped up to the microphone, welcoming the crowd and preparing to initiate the wedding vows. Julian leaned in to whisper something to Scarlett, making her laugh. They truly believed they were untouchable. They thought they had successfully stepped over my old, exhausted body to claim the crown. "If anyone here objects to the union of these two individuals, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." Right on cue, the romantic ambient music abruptly cut out, replaced by a deafening, piercing silence. Before the priest could even look up, the massive state-of-the-art projector screens behind the altar, which were supposed to play a romantic montage of the couple's love story, flashed a blinding, aggressive crimson red. A collective gasp rippled through the 500 guests as huge text materialized on the screens. Notice of corporate fraud and immediate asset freezing. Beneath the headline, the screens began rolling through high-resolution scans of Julian's forged contract, his unauthorized bank routing numbers, and the frantic, incriminating emails he had sent to fast-track the illegal sale of Hale Manufacturing. The room erupted in a wave of panicked whispers. Julian's face instantly drained of all color, his eyes widening in sheer, unbridled terror as he stared at the giant evidence board displayed for everyone he wanted to impress. Before he could even open his mouth to speak, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open. Vance, the billionaire investor, marched down the center aisle with an absolute, terrifying authority. He wasn't alone.
On his left was the lead representative from our commercial bank, and on his right were two uniformed Chicago police officers. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, terrified of the fury radiating from the billionaire. Vance walked right up onto the altar, took the microphone directly from the stunned priest's hand, and turned to face the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vance's voice boomed through the ballroom, cold and sharp as a razor, "I apologize for the interruption, but this wedding is officially over. The man standing before you, Julian Hale, is a fraud. Last night, he attempted to illegally sell me Hale Manufacturing, forging corporate documents and fraudulently securing a $300,000 cash advance from my firm to fund this entire pathetic circus. The acquisition is legally void because he owns absolutely 0% of the company's core assets." Julian began to tremble, his hands shaking so violently he dropped his wedding vows onto the floor. "Vance, please, there's been a mistake. Let's talk in private," he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. "The only place you're talking is a federal interrogation room," Vance snapped, turning to the bank manager beside him. The bank manager stepped forward, pulling a legal document from his briefcase. "Julian Hale, as of 11 a.m. today, the fraud division has officially flagged your accounts. Your personal and corporate lines are frozen, and we are issuing an immediate loan default notice for the $300,000 spent on this venue, the rented exotic vehicles, and your travel accommodations. You are legally broke." Right behind him, the chief legal counsel for Hale Manufacturing stepped onto the stage and handed Julian a crisp manila envelope. "And by order of the board of directors, you are officially terminated from your position as chief executive officer, effective immediately. You are banned from entering any company property." The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. Scarlett stood frozen, staring at Julian as if he were a monster. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The wealth, the status, the multi-million-dollar lifestyle she had traded her soul for had vanished in a matter of seconds. She looked at the police officers, looked at the frozen bank notices, and then looked at Julian's pale, sweating face. Without a single word, she ripped her massive diamond engagement ring off her finger, threw it directly at his chest, and marched off the altar, leaving him standing entirely alone in the wreckage of his own arrogance. I slowly stood up from the back row and walked down the center aisle, the heavy silence of the ballroom echoing with every single step of my leather shoes. 500 pairs of eyes watched me as I stepped onto the altar, walking right past the crumpled, weeping figure of my son. He was on his knees now, staring at the floor, his hands desperately clutching his ruined tuxedo jacket. He looked up at me, his eyes red and brimming with tears of absolute defeat.
"Dad, please," he whimpered, reaching out a trembling hand toward my shoe. "Please save me. I did it for us. I did it for the family." I looked down at him, but I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel hatred. I just felt a profound, cold pity. "You didn't do this for the family, Julian," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the microphone so every single person in that room could hear it. "You did this for your own ego. You forgot that a crown isn't something you steal, it's something you earn through sweat, honesty, and respect. You thought I was old and weak, but you forgot that I built the very foundation you were trying to sell." I turned my back on him, facing the crowd of high-profile investors and business leaders. Hale Manufacturing is safely back under my full legal control. But I am not a man who lives in the past. Today, I am officially announcing the new permanent Chief Executive Officer of our company, a man of absolute integrity who has worked by my side on the factory floor for over 20 years and understands the true value of loyalty. Caleb, the company is yours. Caleb stepped forward from the side of the altar, his face filled with a quiet, humble determination, as the crowd erupted into a sudden, thunderous applause. As the applause echoed through the historic ballroom, the two police officers stepped forward, pulled Julian up from his knees, and clicked the heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. He was led away down the center aisle, crying openly, stripped of his title, his wealth, his fiancée, and his future in front of every single person he had ever wanted to impress. His blind greed built a prison cell, and now he had to sleep in it. I walked out of the venue and stepped into the crisp Chicago air, taking a deep, clean breath. Hale Manufacturing was safe, our workers were protected, and for the first time in 2 years, a profound, unshakable peace settled over my soul. I had saved my legacy, and I was finally ready to enjoy my retirement, knowing that justice had been beautifully served. Sitting here today, looking back at the wreckage of my son's choices, I don't feel anger, just a deep sense of relief that my life's work is safe. Julian thought that an old man's silence was a sign of weakness, but he forgot that the same hands that build an empire can easily dismantle those who try to steal it. In the end, karma didn't just protect my legacy. It taught a greedy soul that respect and loyalty can never be bought or sold. But I want to hear from you. Do you think I did the right thing by exposing him at the altar, or did I go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you learned something valuable from my story, please subscribe and hit the bell icon to join us daily.